Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining the live stream. I haven't live streamed in a while, so I'm hoping this is all working. I'm seeing myself in the live stream. I hope you guys can hear me as well. If you can't hear me and I'm just not saying anything, then let me know. But hello everyone. Joe, thanks for joining in from Oklahoma. Eder from Mexico. Pritam from India. And a couple others that have weird names. So thank you very much. And by the way, we're live streaming on YouTube and Twitter. I'm trying it out. I don't know if my internet can support the double live streaming. So if things start to go south and the quality suffers or the frame rate suffers, let me know. If that does happen, I'll stop streaming on Twitter or X, and we'll go only with YouTube. But yeah, from Canada, Warsaw, Brazil, France, Italy. Guys, you're from all over the place. Well, I'm here in relatively sunny Scotland today. Not the last few days, mind you. Ready to look at Django. So I'm very excited for you guys to join in. So many people over the years have asked me for a Django course. So many of you guys. And I just I've never worked with Django before, so I wasn't in the best position to be making a Django course. But over the last year or so, together with an esteemed teammate and colleague, Leo, that many of you will have seen in the Udemy Q&A, who sadly no longer works with us, but we together have been working on a Django course. And well, he's done a lot of research and writing, and as of about a month ago, I took over. And together we've been working on this Django course for just over a year. So it's been quite a long time on the making, and we're very excited to share it with you guys. Now, in this workshop, we're going to be building a full stack app using Django. This workshop is going to be aimed at beginners, but what we're not going to do is cover HTML and CSS because that would take a little bit too long. So we're going to be building a full stack app. It's a recipe sharing app. And I thought that's a good option because it will let us add user authentication and sort of various different Django models, views, and templates. And we'll talk about what those are as well as we go along. And do a few different things with the application so that you guys know how to start a Django project, the different parts that are involved with the Django project, and the sort of things you can do. As part of this, I'm also launching my new Django course. So the course, and we'll talk more about this course later on in the live stream. I don't want to, start the live stream with an ad, but this is the new course that we're launching. There's a link in the description. It's in early bird mode, so we're still adding a lot of content. And you can see, if you go on the link in the description, all the different bits that you can learn and all the sections that we already have. So it's not even halfway done, and we already have so much in here. And then the different pricing options and what's included in each of them. I know that this course is a bit more expensive than our usual Udemy courses, but it's been a lot of effort going into it, and it's a very good course. I'm very happy with how it's turning out. So there's the basic option and the complete option. The basic option covers a lot of Django and web development. The complete option adds like AI integration and background tasks and stuff like that. That's a bit more advanced. And you've also got the subscription, and we'll talk about all of this later on. But for now, let's get into, this is a nice diagram that I've got prepared for you guys for later. Let's get into the app that we're going to be building in this project. A few more people chatting. Thank you guys very much from New Orleans, Ecuador, Nigeria. Slackdom says they tried Django during the 1x phase. Wow, we're in Django 5 now. That's a while ago now. Near Glusman, will you share the recording later on YouTube? And the answer to that is no. I'm not going to be recording. Well, I'm not going to be sharing this live stream later, but I am, and thank you for reminding me, going to start recording right now. I'm going to start recording right now because we are going to be producing a video based on the live stream that is going to be edited, so it's a bit more fast paced and there's not so much me blabbering on. Yeah, so from Wisconsin, Paul, thanks very much for tuning in. So yeah, let's get started. So the recommendation that I've got for starting any Python project is to use pyenv. So if you don't use pyenv for managing your Python versions or the Windows equivalent, pyenv-win, strongly recommend you do so. It lets you do things like pyenv install --list, which shows you all the different Python versions you can install in your computer, and it will install them for you. You don't have to use the installer. You don't have to mess around with paths, etc. You can see there's quite a lot of them. But the one that we're interested in is the one I've already got installed, which is 3.12.3. It's actually up to 3.12.5 now. Look at that. Python development is like a rocket. So anyway, we are using Python 3.12.3 because that's the one I've got installed, and I want to install another one while I'm live. So pyenv local 3.12, and that creates a .python version file in your current folder that says 3.12, and that's all it does. Now when you do pyenv exec, you can run a command, and appended to the path variable in this command is the Python 3.12 install. So when we do pyenv exec python-v, for example, that gives us 3.12.2. Whereas if we just do python-v, it actually doesn't even work because I don't have Python in my path anymore. I only go through pyenv. So we'll do pyenv exec python-m to run a Python module, venv.vm. And that's going to create a virtual environment for our project. And then we simply do source venv bin activate to activate the virtual environment. You can see here on the right. And then pip install Django. This is going to install 5.1 something, Django 5.1. Django 5.1, that's it. We're just at 5.1. And that's everything that we need for this project. We just need Django. So when you install Django, you also get the Django-admin command line tool. And by the way, if I look over there, that's my notes. I've got a lot of notes for this workshop. If I look there, that's my camera. You guys are between my screens. And I'm 3-screening with the chat down here. So I'm all professional today. So Django-admin is the Django admin tool that lets us do start app. Sorry, start project, not start app. Start app comes later. Start project, and then we give it a name. Recipe share is what we're going to go for. And then where we want to create the project, which is in the current folder. So we do dot for the current folder. And that creates two things in our current folder. It creates manage.py, which is the command line tool for like executing a lot of different Django things, like starting the Django server or various other things. And we've got the recipe share folder where we've got a couple of things. The main one being settings.py. Well, actually, is that the main one? Yeah, I guess both of these are the main one, settings.py and urls.py. Settings.py is worth reading through because it defines how your Django app is going to work. And a couple important things is the installed apps that defines the different parts of Django. We'll go into it in a bit more detail in a moment, that you've got enabled in your project. And there's also some template definitions and database definition. We're using SQLite by default. You can define password validation. So when you register new users, the password has to match certain validators, such as BM minimum length, etc. There's quite a few things in here. And in our Django course, we go into a lot of detail into all the different things you can do here. But it does take a while, so we're not going to change much. The next thing that's also quite important, and we also will go into more detail later, is the urls.py. This defines the different paths in your application that a user may request and what Python view or what Python function is going to run in response or to generate the response to the user. So those two things are important. And we also see some squiggly lines here, Command-Shift-P to select the interpreter, and then we're going to select our virtual environment to make those go away. Deborah from London and Dark Mysterious from India. Welcome, guys. Thank you for tuning in. So as you can see, we've got a URL pattern for the admin panel. We're going to look at the admin panel shortly. But you can see in the settings that we have various installed apps, such as the admin panel or authentication, which handles user authentication for us, etc. And that is a key part of Django. We've got the Django project, which is the recipe share folder and the manage.py and kind of this whole thing that we've got here going on right now. And we've also got Django apps. And a Django project is made up of Django apps. So the admin panel app, for example, defines all the views and templates that are required to launch the admin panel that you'll see in a moment. But if we want to create our own web interface, we need to create our own Django app. And in order to do that, we'll say Python manage py. And now when we run Python, which earlier didn't work, now, of course, because we've got the virtual environment activated, this does run the Python that's in the virtual environment. So we'll do Python manage.py start app, and then you can call your app whatever you want. I'm going to call it app, but web is also a common name if you want to use web. We're going to use app. And that has created another folder in our application. And now we're going to start getting confused, by the way, between Django project, which is this stuff here, Django application, which might be the whole thing, Django app, which is this app here. I'll try to keep track of the names that I'm using for things. But anyway, this is the Django app that's just been created with this command. And this has a few different things. But first, Greg, you've got a meeting that's going to conflict. Will the video be available to review later on? Mentioned this earlier, but no, this is not going to be recorded, but I will be making a video that I'll post on the YouTube channel later on. So subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to get notified when that appears. The video won't be 2 hours long. It'll be shorter. We'll edit it. So the app, you can see, has migrations, a folder there for database migrations. So if you want your application to modify the database in any way, then the modifications that you make to the database will be stored in this migrations folder, and we are going to make some of them. You've got models. A model is essentially a database table, and a model is a class. So the class defines what the database table is like, or what columns are in it, and so forth. And when you instantiate a class and you create an object, that represents a row in the database table. We're going to create some models in a moment. You've got views, and here go the way that you're going to respond to user requests. So actually, now that we're talking about models and views, it's important to talk about the structure of a Django application, Django project. The model view template. So anyway, let's zoom in here. Ooh, that's lagging a bit. Here's your user, and your user makes a request to your Django project. What happens then is that the project performs a URL search. So it goes into the urls.py file that you've seen earlier, which looks like this. And it tries to match the address that the user is requesting with a path that's defined in here. So if the user was making a request to, let's say, example.com/admin, then that /admin is what is going to get searched in urls.py. Then that request that the user made gets passed over to views.py if it matches any URL. So if the user makes a request but there is no URL found, then that results in a 404 error not found, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of. If it does find a view, then it passes the entire user request to the view. In traditional naming that you may have heard before, a view is a controller. So it contains the logic for what's going to happen with the data that the user is passing to us. The view can use a model to talk to the database. So the models are the only things that talk directly to the database. You can use a model to insert something into the database, or update something, or retrieve all of the models, i.e. all of the rows in a table. So you can use them to query the database. In traditional naming, models are also called models. So if you've heard of model view controller, then you can start to see where this is going. So the view will use the models to talk to the database, and we'll get some data back from the database in the form of objects, model objects. And then the view will use that data to render a template and produce some output HTML. That output HTML uses the data from the models, such as to display them on the page, for example. And then the view will grab that HTML and send it back to the user with the appropriate headers and all that stuff that we don't have to worry about as users of Django. So in traditional naming, you've got the views.py, which is the controller, the models, which are the models, and the templates, which are the views. So this is a little bit confusing, but that's MVC. In Django, it's known as MVT for model view template. And that's because the name controller suggests there's logic going on, and there is logic in the views, but the word view also suggests there is some kind of logic going on. So the people here at Django preferred model view template, although they are basically the same thing. So that's how it's going to work. We are going to define some models to talk to a database, some views to use the models to render some templates that we're also going to define, and then we're going to respond to the user with them. Guys, if throughout any of this you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll be more than happy to respond. So now that we've looked at this, I'm just going to close that in its entirety because we don't have that much CPU availability. All right, and so now that we've got that, we can create our models, our views, and our templates. A couple other things that we have in the app is the admin.py, which is used to register the models that we'll create in this app with the admin panel. So they'll be modifiable in the admin panel. I'll show you what that looks like. We've got apps.py that defines some app metadata. We will need this to register the app with the main projects to make sure that the project uses this app. Just as we have the admin, the auth, etc., we have to register our own app. We can do it just now. In fact, this is app, just like that. That's it registered. So there wasn't much to do. You've got tests. If you want to write any tests for your app specifically, you can do that here. And that's it. So let's get started with our models. And the first thing that we need to think about is what kind of data we want to store in the database for this application. So it's a recipe sharing app. So we're going to store recipes. We're going to have users, but those are already built into Django, so we don't need to create a model for users. And we're going to store ratings because a user is going to be able to rate other people's recipes. So you get your rating at the end. And we're going to have various constraints between these. So a user can't rate their own recipes, etc. So I'll just show you how all of that works. So to create a model, we simply create a class and we inherit from models.model. And then within this class, we define as class fields the various attributes or the various database columns that we want inside this table. For example, we want title, which is going to be a character field. And you can define various validation steps here, such as max length, and I'll show you how to use other validators as well. If you want ingredients, that's, for example, let's use text field and the instructions. Text field. Usually it's called method, right, in a recipe, but we'll call it instructions anyway. By the way, if you can hear my daughter screaming in the background, that's fine. She's 10 months, 10.5 months, so she's having great fun. Okay, so sorry, I'm just typing away without saying anything. We'll look at this created ad in a second, actually. So you've got 3 fields so far. We've got the title, ingredients, and instructions, and all of these are going to hold text in the database. But so what's the difference between them? We can use the model through various Django mechanisms to create the HTML form that is going to be shown to the users when we want them to give us the data we need to create a model. So given this model, Django can create some HTML code for us. And it needs to decide what HTML input types are going to be part of that form. So models.character field is going to, by default, create an input of type text. So that's input type text, which is a single line input. Makes sense because for a title, we don't really need a lot, but this is going to be a text area. And so is this. The text field here allows us to enter more text. So that's the key difference between these two. Use the right field type for the kind of data you want to save. And the official Django documentation, by the way, has a lot of information about the different fields that you can use. Okay, so those 3 are good. And now we need the created at to store when a recipe was created. So that's models.datetime field. There you go. But we don't want to pass a value for this field. We want it to be created automatically. We want the value to be generated automatically when we save this to the database. To do that, we say auto now add equal true. Now, auto now add means that when we add this model to the database, this field will get a value, but when we modify this, it will not change. That is updated at, which is identical datetime field, but auto now instead of auto now add. And there you have it. Now this will change every time we modify the model and save it to the database again. 10-month-old, you must be tired. She's an angel, to be honest, but she does like to wake up at 5 a.m., which I'm not such a fan of. David, is Django okay with Postgres? Yes, definitely. I meant to say that. In our Django course, linked below, we use Postgres, and we run Postgres and Django using Docker Compose, well, and Celery and Redis, everything using Docker Compose. Everything works very well together. Postgres is a perfect database for Django. For this workshop, we're using SQLite, but switching from SQLite to Postgres is pretty much trivial. There are some things you want to be careful with, but it's fairly straightforward. Okay, so the last thing that we need in this model is the author of the recipe. So now we're going to refer to another model, and we're going to establish a link between the recipe and the user model. So we need the user model in here, and we need to import it. So we'll say from Django contrib auth models, import user, and use a dot there. Is that right? That's right. And what this does in the database is generate a column called author_ID. And by the way, the recipe model also has an ID column. It's just created automatically, and we don't need to specify it ourselves. So the ID column will be automatically generated. It's a big integer auto-incrementing. If you want to use a different kind of mechanism for IDs, then you can define your own. So we've got a foreign key there. We can also define what happens when a user is deleted. Should their recipes be deleted as well? So that's on delete models.cascade. And finally, we can say related name is recipes. And what this does is it creates a recipes attribute in the user model when the relationship is completed. So from now on, we'll be able to say user.recipes when we are interacting with a user object. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So by using a foreign key like this, that creates author ID in the database. So this is a one-to-one. One-to-one? One-to-many, sorry. So a user can have many recipes, but each recipe only has one author. So that's this model, the recipe class. There are more things you can define in the model. Of course, you can define methods to perform various calculations related to this data if you have complex calculations you want to do. But for now, we don't need to do that. Let's create our rating class. And again, this will be a fairly simple class where we define the recipe, which is foreign key to recipe. And again, on delete, it's going to be models.cascade. And the related name is going to be ratings. So that when we are talking about a particular recipe, we can say recipe.ratings, and that will load all of the many ratings that it can have associated with it. And again, this creates recipe ID in the database. And I'll show you the database schema. Schema? there was a bit of a West Boss bit on schema versus schema. So yeah, that creates recipe.ratings. Then we've got user, which is this, but we don't need the related name because you are not going to want to access a user's ratings, although you might want to, and if so, then you can define a related name. Then you've got the value, which is models.integer field. And here we are going to define some, not custom validators, but we're going to define some validators because we want this value to be between 1 and 5. So we can import validators by saying from Django core validators, import min value validator and max value validator. So these validators go in here. Validators equal min value validator of 1 and max value validator of 5. So you can see this is a list of validators, of validator objects. And the first one is min value validator of 1, so it cannot go under that, and it can't go over 5 either. This, if you use the model to create your HTML form, which we will be using, automatically handles, showing errors in the HTML and all that kind of stuff. So it's really quite handy. Finally, let's do a created at field that we're going to just copy from there. And there is one more thing that we need to do. You might want to say that each user can only leave a rating on one recipe. So you might be tempted to do something like this. Right? You say, okay, the recipe and the user must be unique. But this is not the right way to do it at all, as I'm sure you'd find quite quickly, because what this means is that in your ratings table, you can only have one user for a given value, or one value for the user column and one value for the recipe column. So any user can only leave one rating on a specific recipe if you do it like this. And only one user can leave a rating at all, because when they try to leave a second rating, we wouldn't be able to add them to the table because unique is true, and the value for this user ID would already be in the database if they've left a rating before. So this is not the way to do it, because we want both user and recipe together to be unique. So a user can only leave one rating on a specific recipe. Django has a way to do that. We say class meta, and unique together is recipe and user. This class meta is a very popular pattern in Python as of late, where you use this meta class within a class to define various configuration properties about the class. And like this, for example, if you use Pydantic, this is something that they do quite often. So like this is how we define that these two have to be unique together. And you can't have two rows in the table with the same user ID and same recipe ID. So those two. Excellent. That's our models. Now, what we want to do next is register these models with the admin panel and have a look at the admin panel. So, Andre, when comes the new course available on Udemy? The course is still being developed, so it's early access right now. When the course is complete, the basic version of the course will become available on Udemy. So actually, before we go into the admin panel, let me just quickly talk about Udemy and what's going to happen with this course. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the workshop, but I don't want any of you guys to buy something and then regret it. So the basic version of this course that covers HTML and CSS in a lot of depth, as you can see all over here. There's like a gazillion videos on all the sorts of things you can do with HTML and CSS. HTML and CSS, how to set up the Django project, Docker Compose, user authentication, relationships and deployments to Railway, which is a really nice way to deploy it. All of that is included in the basic course. And when the course is finished, the basic course will go on Udemy. So for now, the basic course is $15. When the whole course is complete, it will go up to $25 here on Teclado, and it will go on Udemy as well. The complete course will not go on Udemy, and that adds AI integration with background tasks. So if you want to perform some kind of calculation using AI, but not interrupt the work that your users are doing, then you want background tasks. We use Celery for that, which is the way to do it, really. So AI integration with Celery for background tasks. We'll add browser testing with Playwright, so I'll show you how to use Playwright to write browser tests. Continuous integration with GitHub Actions to run those tests. So that is part of the complete course, and those topics are not going to be on the Udemy course. Which actually brings us to also another issue, which is whether you should wait to take this on Udemy. Or whether you should buy it now on our website. And I should say that teclado.com, which is linked below, is the website that I made. I made this platform. And the reason I made it is because, simple things. I wanted to be able to put a code in a lecture title, right? You can see that. You can't do that on Udemy or any other platform. I wanted to be able to show you videos in 4K, right? I wanted the best possible quality for my videos so that you guys can enjoy them. So that brings us to why I think taking the course in Teclado might be a good option for you, or why it might not be a good option. This here is a screenshot of a zoomed in, it's a zoomed in screenshot of a video on Teclado on 4K. And this here, I'm not sure if you can see it well on the stream, but it's a video in some of the other platforms. The quality is just much worse. You can see the comparison here. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't matter to me. You know, the video quality is just, I don't care about the video quality. That's fine. I find that when the video quality is something that matches my screen and my editor, which are in 4K, I just find it a bit more immersive. You know, I enjoy it a bit more. Whereas when the quality is really terrible and I'm on full screen, I'm always thinking how terrible it looks. And I don't want to think about that. I wanted to give you guys the best possible quality. The audio quality is also better as well. So if you like to hear me talk, which I do a lot in these courses, then that's an option. The next thing, which is arguably more valuable, is that our newer courses have text in the lectures. So that's something that a lot of you guys have found valuable, is when there's an ebook associated with a course, so that each video has text associated with it as well. And the benefit of that is you can watch the video at the beginning when you first take the course, but if you want to refresh your knowledge later on, you can use the text and it's so much faster to go through. Also, you can read the text while watching the video and it helps with retention as well. So our newer courses are starting to have this text associated with each lecture. And as well as that, you also have the code changes in each lecture. So at the bottom of each lecture, when we create a new file in the video, I put this here for the new code that was written so that you can copy it and follow along with the video much more easily. And if we change a file in the course, then I show you the git diff for that as well, so that you can again follow more easily. Countless times a student asks me a question, I have to go into GitHub and check out their entire code, and then there was a comma missing somewhere, you know, or something like that. Well, this hopefully will prevent that and will make sure that you don't get slowed down in your learning. So these three reasons, as well as all the new features that I'm working on for the website, are the reason why I wanted to make this platform. And it's kind of difficult to do in a generic platform like Udemy or like Pact. So I wanted to be able to make my own stuff and give you the best experience that I can. The final thing is that you can get access to all our courses. So if you want to take all our courses, you can get a subscription and then you get access to all the courses. You don't have to pay anything extra. So the link is below. There's a coupon code called Django for $30 off your first year if you want to take out the subscription. It also helps us greatly continuing the development on this platform. But of course, if a subscription is not for you, I know a lot of people don't like subscriptions, you can just buy the courses individually. That's totally fine as well. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you about this before you start buying the course or waiting to buy the course on Udemy. It's always up to you, of course. Udemy is a fine platform. I just think ours is better. But anyway, don't tell Udemy I said that. All right. Yeah, I mean, just code in the lecture titles. You can't do that anywhere else. Let's go back to our project and work on the admin panel. So let's register our models with the admin panel so that we can go into the admin panel and modify them. So we'll say from app.models import recipe and rating, and then all we have to do is admin site register recipe and rating. That's it. That's now registered with the admin panel. Finally, what we have to do is tell our database about the changes that this app introduces. So a database migration. To do that, we say Python manage.py migrate. And now you should see that I've forgotten something. So Oh yeah, I forgot. I forgot one of the main things, that's not the right command. It's make migrations. There you go. Python manage py make migrations, and now that creates a database migration for our app, and that calculates the changes between the current database state and the new database state that we want for our models. So basically, what changes do we need to make to the database so that these models can work with the database? And that's create these two tables with these columns. So if you go into the new migration that's been created, you'll see that it looks a little bit intimidating. Adebowale, sad I was late. Don't worry, my man. I'm going to make a video based on this live stream later on, and we are not too far in yet. So you can still catch on. So we've got this database migration, and you can see it depends on a previous migration. It's the initial migration for this app, and that's important because if you ever want to make changes to your user model, which we are not doing, but if you do, it is recommended that you do it in the initial migration. And then it has some operations, and the operations are just straightforward, create this model with these fields, create that model with those fields. That's it. So it basically reflects our models, but now when we do Python manage.py migrate, that's actually going to change our database. If we go into our database right now, it has the other migrations that are there in the built-in apps. You can see that the built-in apps are all in here. These are the ones that are currently in our database. You've got all these tables. But when we do Python manage.py migrate, we're going to apply the new migration that we've got. And now we've got app rating and app recipe. And you can see here user ID, recipe ID, and this one has author ID and whatnot. So these are the two tables that we've created here. Hi from Egypt. Hello. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just checking out the Twitter. 28 of you on Twitter. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. But you guys are not chatting on Twitter, which is just as well because it's kind of difficult to keep track on two chats at the same time. Okay, so now we've got our migration with make migrations. We've applied it with migrate. Now we need to create a super user. To create a super user that has access to the admin panel. Only super users have access to the admin panel. So I'm going to create example username, example@example.com, and the password example password. And there you go. Now we can do Python manage.py run server. You can see how we use the manage.py file to do most administrative commands. So when we run the server, we get this. Hey, everything worked. Now let's go over to /admin. And now you can see we've got this here. We can say example username, example password, and sign in. This is what the admin panel looks like by default. So we've got ratings, recipes. We can go into recipes, for example, and we can create one, and you can put your title, ingredients, etc. in there. So let's create one. So let's say, I don't know, some 100g flour, 100g water, pinch of yeast. Mix all and wait 24 hours. And then let's select our current user and save. Hey, Aldo, I'm your student on Udemy. Great one. Thank you very much. Cheers for Sunday Brazil. Welcome. Thanks for joining in. It's really great that you guys are here. It's amazing. Sometimes when you're planning one of these live streams, when I'm planning one of these live streams, I don't actually know if anybody's going to show up, and it's a bit gut wrenching. You're thinking, am I going to be doing this for no one? So thank you very much, guys, for the support, for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying it, and I'm glad that you're liking the courses as well. Good morning from Mexico. Good morning. Well, good evening from the UK. This is the admin panel. You can do a lot of customization with the admin panel. The Django course goes into how to do that. But for now, we're not going to do it. You can change like all sorts of things here, how to create things, how to search, grouping of stuff, etc. But for now, we are going to leave it at that. So if you go into here, you can see that we've now got our recipe created here. The ID is auto-generated. We've got ID 1. And and we've got all our ingredients and instructions and everything. The author ID is 1 because that matches the user that we've created, which has ID 1. That's the super user. You can see is staff. I think that's is staff. I think is the super user detector, maybe, or maybe it's something else. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I think it's staff. So we've got some data, but obviously we don't want our users to go into the admin panel to create recipes. We want to show them a website where they can create the recipes, right? In order to do that, we need views. So let's create one. Let's go into views.py, and we're going to start by stopping the application and hiding that terminal. And then we're going to create a view. Quick question. If Django maintains all the history of migrations, won't it get messy as we develop? Somewhat, yes. You may end up with a lot of migrations, but you can collapse them if you want. You can delete all migrations and collapse them into one with the current state of the database. So that's something that you can do. So here in views, we're going to first create a view to see all the recipes that are in our database. We're just going to list all the recipes in the database table. In order to do that, we are going to use a class-based view. Django has 2 ways of creating views: class-based views and function-based views. There's a bit of debate as to which one you should use. Function views rely on you writing plain Python code to do what you want to do, whereas class-based views use inheritance to reduce the amount of code that you have to come up with on your own. And some people feel that inheritance is like magical or difficult to understand, which it kind of is unless you really know what's going on behind the scenes. So if you are familiar with Django and you start to know a lot about how it works, class-based views make you go much faster, but function-based views are easier to reason about because you can see in the code in front of you everything that they do. So it's up to you which one you go for. In the course, we use class-based views for the most part, and here we're going to do the same. So class-based views, we're going to say from Django views generic import list view. So this is the first view that we are going to implement. And this is how you implement a view, or how you implement a generic view. You subclass it, and then you define various properties about it. And sometimes you define methods as well, but in this case, we don't need to. You can always, by the way, let's import a recipe in here. You can always, by the way, go into the list view. If it works, well, it doesn't, so let's go in here. You can always go into the view and read the code. The Django is all Python code. There's no like compiled C code or anything like that. So you can go in here and look at what it does. And what the list view basically does is it helps you do a few things. It gives you a list of objects as a query that you can then filter or sort or even do pagination. And it can do the sorting, filtering, and pagination for you very easily. If you use the function-based view, you would have to do it on your own or by hand. For now, we're not going to do pagination, but later on we might do. We do in the course. Then we define the template name, which is going to be app/recipelist.html. And this is something that I really like, is preceding each template name within an app with the app's name. So our app is called app. That's why I'm putting app in front of every template. I'll show you more about why I'm doing that in a moment. Finally, we've got context object name, which is going to be recipes. And what that means is that within the template, you can use the variable called recipes to access the list of recipes that this view has extracted from the database. And then let's do ordering minus created at. This simply sorts by the created at column, yeah, that's right, in descending order. So the newest recipes are at the top. Good evening from Serbia. Hugh, welcome. Thanks for joining in. That's it. That's all we need for this view. So this gives us a list of recipes. Enrique, sorry, I am a Python developer. I can write my own code. Yeah, very good. I mean, you could write your own base list view if you want. But it's already there. You don't have to. Okay, so what is this template? Where is this coming from? It's not coming from anywhere. We still have to define it. So, templates. Here's how I like to handle templates in a Django app. You go to the top level of your project and you create a templates folder. So notice that that is alongside manage.py. Then within it, you create a folder for each of your apps. So at the moment, we only have one. So templates/app. Then in here, we say recipe list.html. But Django is not going to be able to find this template until we go into settings.py. Enrique, by the way, I wasn't mocking you. I see you've deleted your message. It's fine to prefer function-based views and, write it all out and it be, all the code there in front of you, not inherited through potentially many layers of inheritance. I think that's a perfectly acceptable, decision that you can take in your code base. Many people prefer that. I recently read an article that was in favor of that. It makes sense. It's totally up to you which one to use. Where was I? Yeah, templates. So at the moment in our templates configuration, we've got app dirs equal true. What that means is inside our app, we can create a templates folder. And then any, for example, I'll show you, it's going to be easy. We can create templates folder in here, and inside it, we can create recipe list.html. Don't do this though, by the way, because I'm going to delete it in a second. And then in your views, you can just say recipe list.html. And that's fine. That is what app dirs true means. I don't like this because for recipe underscore list.html, you're probably not going to encounter any issues. But if you have templates that have a bit more generic names, you might have the same template name in two apps. And then it starts to become a bit more difficult to find the template that you were talking about and to realize and understand what template you are using in a given view. So I like doing this so that, I know this is a template inside app. You could do app in here. You could do that. App templates app. But I just find that weird, having the app name inside that folder with the app name as well. So instead, we delete the whole templates app and we put it on the outside. And then in settings.py, we say directories is base dir /templates. And this here refers to this templates folder at the top level. And you can turn this to false if you want. I'm not going to do it because I haven't tested that and I don't want to break the whole thing. So I'm just going to leave it as true for now. You forgive me if I'm playing it safe here live. But I think you can turn this to false. So what this happens is Django is now going to look in this templates directory first for templates. And app/recipe list is this one that we're talking about here. Then if you're coming from Flask, at the Bowale, if you're coming from Flask, I don't think you're going to find Django too complex, to be honest. You're going to have to read some documentation, use some AI tools if you want to get up to speed really quickly. But if you already have knowledge of Flask or Fast API or something like that, I think you can understand Django pretty quickly. Because now that we're here in this template, we're going to use the Django templating language, which looks pretty similar to Jinja. So we'll say for recipe in recipes and here we can simply say recipe.title, for example. This looks a lot like Jinja code. So if you're familiar with Flask, you'll know what this means. Here we're using a for loop to repeat a portion of the HTML a number of times, one per recipe in this recipes collection. So where is the recipes collection coming from? Well, that's this context object name that we defined in our view. So this gets the list of recipes and it is now available in our template. I'm actually going to grab all this and cut because in this HTML template, I want to press exclamation mark and tab for the emmet abbreviation. And then here, I'm going to put in this in the body. I just think this looks a bit nicer. I think it would work anyway, because the stuff in HTML goes into the body if you don't give it the boilerplate, but this is just better. And you always want this viewport meta tag here if you ever want your website to work on mobile. More information on the viewport meta tag in the Django course as well. Sorry, I'm gonna stop shilling the Django course, but I'm very proud of all the stuff that's gone into it. All right, we've got our template, we've got our view, and I was about to start the application when I remembered that there is something missing. And that is the last thing, that we need to wire up the recipe list view with the stuff that we mentioned in the beginning, the URLs for the URL patterned search. So we need to somehow put that in here. The common way to do it is to create a new file in your app called urls.py, define the URLs that map to each view in your application, and then include them inside the project URLs. So let's do that, and I'll need my notes for this. So we'll say from django.urls import path, and then we define URL patterns, and it has to be called URL patterns, and we say path, empty string, and we'll now bring in our view. Let's say from app.views import recipe list view. Let's say from app import views, and then we'll say views.recipe list view, and this is the class we want to say as view, and we'll also give it a name, recipe list. Okay, so there you have it. This is how you define a URL pattern for a view. Now, it's interesting that this empty string at the beginning. Let's bring it in. Let's import that into this URL patterns, and I'll explain what that empty string is. So we'll say from Django URLs import path include, and we'll say include empty string. No, sorry. I think it's, let me see. I think it's path. Sorry, path empty string to include. Yeah, path empty string include app.urls. Okay, so what's the empty string? It's popping up again, right? This empty string gets added to this empty string to calculate what URL is going to map to what the user requested. So at the moment, this is empty, so it refers to the home page of the application. That's what empty string refers to, no endpoint, whereas this one refers to /admin/. So this one refers to empty string. And then we concatenate to this empty string the views or the paths defined here. So this one is also empty. So empty plus empty results in the home page of the application. If you put in here user, then the end result would be /user. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's get rid of that. And all of this. Okay, now we're ready to run the application. So Python manage py run server. There you have it. You've got your recipes. So this is one of the reasons why Django gets a little bit of a bad rep for beginners, which I can certainly understand. We've done a lot of work to get one word out printed in our template, right? But the thing is, we don't have to do most of this work anymore now that it's done. We've set up our models, we've understood how the view kind of works, we've got the URL and we've got it imported in here, and we've got our settings changed. Now we're ready to just create more views, and that's all we have to do. So part of the reason and the reason why I don't recommend Django for a complete Python beginner is because there's a lot to it. You've got all these files and you have to understand a bit about what's going on in order to not get lost. But once you've got a bit of experience with a more straightforward for beginners web platform like Flask or FastAPI even, or Starlight, I think you can get to grips with Django quite quickly and easily. And Django is very good for larger projects and more complex projects. Adebowale asks, you mentioned AI tools for getting up to speed in a transition of Flask to Django. Do you mind sharing? I feel like there's been a lot of talk about Cursor, the editor I'm using. on Twitter lately. All the influencers that are shilling Cursor and whatnot. I think for the intermediate developer, Cursor is very powerful. For complete beginners, I think it can do a little bit too much for you, and then you don't learn. So you have to be careful with AI for that. For advanced developers that are doing very complicated or complex things in your projects, maybe the AI isn't quite there yet. But if you're building, simple SaaS applications and you're not, doing groundbreaking stuff, AI development is very helpful, and you can use it to produce some decent code. The reason why I don't really recommend learning to code using AI is because it makes a lot of mistakes, and it makes things up, and sometimes things that on the surface look reasonable but actually aren't. And if you don't know what's going on, you're not going to be able to fix it once it gets into the mess that sometimes it does get into. So it speeds you up if you know what you're doing. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that for now. Asif asks, the view used variables that have special meanings. How did that view class get used? Yeah, so that's why some people don't like class-based views, because you have to know how to use them. It's not obvious. You don't have the Python code in front of you saying, hey, this variable means this variable means that. You define the values that the view expects, and then the view uses them in the superclass, which I don't have anymore, but here, base list view. So it can use them in here to do stuff for you. So yeah, it's a bit more confusing, but that's kind of how it works. Selena, hello from New York. Love your content. Thank you very much. No, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, let's continue because, guys, we are almost an hour in and there is a lot more to do. So let's work on the next view. We're going to allow users to create a view. Hey, Jose, can you share some concept of hyperlinked model serializer? I don't think I can do that. I don't know what that is. So no, sorry, I can't do that. My light just went off, so yeah, I'm a bit darker now. It's battery operated. Okay, let's allow users to create recipes. So recipe create view, you can give it whatever name you want. We're going to say create view. And we will have to import that, which I think we import from there. And then, just as we have for this one, we need to define what data the recipe is dealing with. So model, because this view is going to be used to create a recipe model, and the template name, which is app/recipe-form.html. And now there are a few different ways to tell Django how to define the form that is going to be used in the template, the HTML form with the different fields and whatnot. The easiest way is to simply say fields, and then in here give the names of the fields from the model that you want to include. So that's title, ingredients, and instructions. And now these three fields will be in the form. The user will fill the three fields in, and that's it. Other ways involve creating a form manually, so defining each of the fields in the form and the validation that you want for those fields, etc. I'll show you how to do that in the Django course, but not here. It's something that you can do, but we're gonna do it a bit later when we look at ratings and stuff. But it's a little bit more complicated. And also you can ask Django to generate a form based on your model, which is kind of what's happening here, but in an indirect way. Then we need to define success URL, which is where we want to go when the form is submitted and the model is created successfully. So we want to go to this view here. In order to do that, we need to import, I think it's from Django URLs. From Django URLs, import reverse lazy. So we'll say reverse lazy recipe list. And here is where we're using the name that we defined here. Reverse lazy simply means that when the success URL is used, at that point is when it's going to calculate what URL to go to. It's not going to calculate it when we define the class. Okay, so that's basically it. And when we use this, which we need to define here in URL patterns, so let's do that. We're going to say recipe new. So we'll say, well, I'm going to copy that, put a comma in there and say recipe/new, and we'll say view recipe create view as view, and we'll say recipe create. I think I put an S in there by accident. There you go. We're going to encounter a small issue. So let's run our server. Go in there. We've got our recipe there because we've not changed anything. And we'll say recipe new. We don't have a template for this. Let's create a template. Let's go into templates, app, recipe create.html, I think it was called. Recipe create, recipe form, sorry. Recipe form.html. Now we put in our form in here. So at its core, we're going to do this boilerplate thing again with exclamation mark tab, recipe sharing create. And then we can say, let me see, actually, I've got my notes in here. Let's try form as P. Let's see if that works. Recipe new. There you go. Yeah, that worked. So that's not in my notes. I'm actually playing with fire here. This might not work. So that you've got your form as P, which basically just renders this form using paragraph tags, which you can't see. You can't see this. Oh, because I'm on full screen. Anyway, just renders the label and the field in the appropriate paragraph tags. And that's fine, but you can see that you can't style these so easily because you don't have access to the HTML. So in order to add some styling in here, I'll show you my preferred way of adding styling in one of these apps, which is by creating a base.html template. And then we'll use some template inheritance. So again, we add our HTML boilerplate, and then we add Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS, if you've not used it, is a CSS framework where you define CSS classes, or you use CSS classes that have specific meaning to style your elements without having to write the CSS yourself. So by using the Tailwind CSS file like this, you can simply import it from a content delivery network. And then we are going to add some base styling. I seriously overestimated how much time, or underestimated how much time 2 hours is. So we are going to add a little bit of default styling here. Let me just bring it in from my notes. And we'll just have to go through with that. So here's a bunch of code that you've not seen before. Let me hide that as well. Anyway, so what we're doing here is nothing to do with Django. This is all HTML. But what we're defining is various HTML elements and various classes within each element, and the classes can be used to style the element. For example, this one here sets the background color to something. This one here sets the background color to a blue, and so forth. So these are various sizing and styling classes. This here is a navigation bar that I'll show you in a second. And then we've got this element here. This is actually quite important, and I'll show you that in a second. And then we've got a footer. So three main elements using Tailwind CSS. The top element here is a navigation bar. So you can see we've got A elements for links. And then in the href attribute of the link, which is what we use to define the URL that the link is going to, we have this URL tag that uses the view name that's defined here, recipe list, to produce the URL to connect to a certain view endpoint. And that's basically all that's happening in here. We've got links to various parts of the site, like to the homepage or create a recipe, etc. Now, then we've got an if statement. If the user is authenticated, then we add a link to log out. Otherwise, we add login and sign up. And these things here all don't exist at the moment. And so we are going to comment that one out for the time being. Yeah. Then we have a main class here with this if statement, which is actually important for flashed messages. So a flashed message in Django is just something that allows you to define there's a message that's going to be popping up on the next template or the next response that you send to the user. And you can add messages to display to the user. For example, when a user logs in, you can flash a message that says you've successfully logged in. And then this here is responsible for rendering those messages if you have flashed any of them. So here we iterate over the flashed messages if there are any, and we simply display them. So nothing more than that. Finally, there's a footer at the bottom. And sorry that I'm going quite quickly, but it's actually over an hour now, and we need to look at Django stuff more so than Tailwind CSS. Paul asks, is that Tailwind CSS referenced at the Python file generation or at runtime? Neither. This Tailwind CSS file is only referenced by the user's browser. So when they load our page, then their browser downloads Tailwind CSS and we can use it on the page, but it has nothing to do with our Python code. Anyway, so now that we've got this little bit out of the way, let's talk about how to actually use template inheritance in the Django environment, because we have defined this base.html template with all that stuff, and there's a little surreptitious bit here, block content. This is what we can overwrite in child templates. So here's where we can use Django for within these templates. Or rather, this is the bit that is actually relevant to Django. So we'll say extends app/base.html and then block content. So now we've copied everything from base.html. That's what extends app/base.html does. And we can overwrite a certain block. So every one of our templates is now simply going to extend base.html and do something different within the content block. So what do we want to do in this content block? Well, we'll say h1, for example, and we'll simply say edit or create recipe, for example. And then we can create a form, and then we can simply do form.asp as we had before. And finally, we need a submit button. So we'll say button, type of submit. And we can give it a few classes like bg blue 500, text white, px4, py2, rounded with a space, and hover bg blue 600. So these are just some Tailwind CSS classes to give it some styles. The numbers at the end of each color is just a shade of the color. So this is a shade of blue. This is some padding, horizontally, padding vertically, rounded corners, and a different color when we hover over the button. And then we'll say submit. Paul asks, what happens if the CDN is down? Is there a way around that? I think there are ways to define a backup. if it's down. Although if the CDN is down, yeah, there are problems. There are big problems. I mean, yeah, it's possible. What I do on the Teclado site, for example, is I compile the Tailwind CSS that we use, minimize it so it's as small as possible, and ship it on the site itself, and then cache it. So it's a little bit more performance because you don't have to download the whole of Tailwind CSS, which is what this does. You only download what you actually need. But it's a bit lengthy to cover now. All right, let's have a look at this. Let me open up the site. And you can see, by the way, that this hasn't changed because we've not updated this template at the moment. We'll say recipe new. And this is what I thought was going to happen. So I'm actually going into base.html and we're going to delete this logout. We're going to delete all of this for now. We're going to delete all of that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's go back. Okay. There you go. So now we've got our form and you can see the various bits there. What I deleted was just the login, logout, sign up stuff because we haven't done user authentication yet. So we've got our H1, which you can see is not a very large text, but then you've got your title, ingredients, instructions, etc. There are better ways to style this, obviously, and I've got nicer styling on my notes, but we don't have really enough time to go through it. So you're a performance engineer and site reliability engineer. So I've seen this issue before. Yeah. Yeah, it's fair enough. It's always difficult to decide whether to serve it with a CDN because the user might already have it cached and so it increases performance, or to serve it yourself so that the user caches and downloads only what they need, which also increases performance. Yeah. If everybody used the Tailwind CSS CDN, then it would always be cached for everyone and nobody would have to download it. And that would increase performance across the board. But hey, look up CCBV for anyone interested in classy class-based views. Okay, thank you for that. I will look into that. All right, so let's close base.html for the time being and let's go into recipe list and copy or cut that stuff there and then do extends app/base.html as we did before and block content and block content. And we can just put this in there. And then when we go in here, we now get our recipe in there. I do have slightly nicer styling in my notes. Which I will bring in later, not just now. Okay, now, what I did want to talk about is when we go to this new recipe, we go into the form. Let's give it a title, test recipe, pinch of nutmeg. That's always something that bothered me about recipes. How much is a pinch, you know? So you can see we hit submit and nothing's happening. That is because I think I made a mistake. Let me see. Inspect. The inspector is not appearing anywhere. Don't know if my thing's crashing. I think, anyway, the problem is that this button is not part of the form. So I think I need to define the form here. Sorry about that. I have something different in my notes, which is why this is not going how it was supposed to. Let's do this. I'll put everything inside a form and let me try that out again. I feel like I should have tested this better. Test recipe 1, 2. Okay, there you go. Very good. So this is one of the two errors that I was expecting. CSRF verification failed. So what does that mean? Well, CSRF errors are kind of complicated. We covered them in depth in our Django course. But essentially what happens with a CSRF error is another website can use data stored in your browser to interact with a different website. So it lets a malicious attacker use the data that's stored in your browser about another website to interact with it. For example, if you didn't log out of your bank account, you still have some data in your browser stored about your account for that bank, and potentially a malicious attacker could use that data. So we want to prevent CSRF attacks. And to do that, we use CSRF token in here. A CSRF token is a unique secure token that's generated by our server when the user requests for the form, for the HTML form. The server generates the CSRF token, so the attacker wouldn't have the CSRF token, and they would need that in order to submit the form. So that's a very, very short explanation on CSRF tokens. We do go into a lot more detail in the Django course. There you go. This is the error that I was actually expecting earlier, which is that we don't have an author ID. That's because although we created a super user earlier, we didn't log in to the website. So there is the site doesn't know who we are. We need to log in first. And if we go back in here and we go to /login, we get 404 not found. This doesn't exist yet. So let's add user authentication to the site. I think that with around 40 minutes to go, we've got enough time to add user authentication and give it a good try to create recipes and be able to see them and so forth. Maybe we won't get as far as the notes wanted to get to, but we'll do something. So we already have, if we go to settings.py, and we've already seen this before, we have the auth installed app. So how do we use this app? What's in the app? Well, one of the things that we have is various views for logging in and logging out, etc. There is actually no sign up view, so we do have to create that ourselves. So how do we do logins and logouts? Let's go to views.py, urls.py, and in here we need to define that this app uses the login and logout views. So we'll start with login. We need to say path/login. Sorry, not /login. We don't put the slash in front. Login. And then we need to import the login view. So that's from Django contrib auth views, import login view. And we simply say login view as view. And we can give it a name of login. But what template should we use for this view? We need a comma there. The login view needs a template that allows the user to enter their details in order to log in. So we pass it in here, template name, and we say app/login.html. And now here in app, we need to create login.html, which is the template for the form that gets shown when we ask the users for the username and password. So again, we extend app/base.html and then the block content and block content and block. And in here we put in the form. But what form? And this is where the Django ecosystem can get a little bit confusing, because this view gives us a form that we can use in the template, but we've not defined this view. So it's not maybe so obvious where that form is coming from. But here we actually have a form that we can render using form.asp. And as we've seen, we also need the CSRF token. We need the button that we'll implement in a moment, and we need to put everything inside a form with the method of post. So when we do all of this, we will get a form. Now I'm going to simply bring it in from my notes because it looks almost identical. But we've got some more styling, so it looks a little bit nicer. We've got the h2 with login. We've got the form with a method of post and various classes for styling, the CSRF token, form.asp to render the form fields, and the button type submit that says login. Okay, let's try it out. Now, if we go here and we say login, we get our username and password. So that's very good. But we haven't registered. We need to add user registration first. This already works and will already be connected to this auth user database. So actually, let's try that out because I don't think I've tried that out. Let's go to login and type example username, example password. This is the super user that we created earlier. Okay, and that did work actually. So maybe we don't need to add user registration yet. Let's continue without user registration for the time being. You can see that we are redirected to /accounts/profile because that's the default in Django. When you log in, you go to this address. So instead, we need to define a different destination for when we log in. So let's go to settings.py and maybe down here under the password validators, we'll simply define login redirect URL. And that's going to be recipe-list, which is the name that we defined for the recipe list. Login redirect URL as well as logout redirect URL are the two settings that we can configure here for what should happen after we log in. So we've done that. Now let's try again. And there you have it. So we are logged in, not that you would be able to tell given our current styling, but we are logged in and we've got the recipes in here. Brilliant. Let me stop that and we will work on user registration. Even though we don't really need it because we've got the super user, I feel like user registration is something that you guys would be interested in. So let's create a view, and this one is going to be a function-based view for user registration. The reason why the Django auth app doesn't come with user registration is because there are many different things that you may want to do with user registration. So we'll implement it ourselves. So to define a function-based view, it's actually a good thing because we're going to be able to define a function-based view. We simply define a function that takes in the request. So the incoming request from the user, it contains the information like the form data they submitted or the headers that they sent, or if they sent JSON, then everything that's involved with that, etc. Now, if the request method was post, then we assume the user submitted the form. Otherwise, we need to say form is sign up form, and we need to create this. The reason why we create an empty form is because we want to pass this form to the template so that we can use it there to render the various fields as we've done. For example, in login.html, we've got this form variable. So we need to create the form variable so that we can pass it when we say return render that we need to import. And then we pass in the request, the template app signup.html and the context. So we say form is form. Now in signup.html, we'll be able to use the variable form. That's what this defines. And the value of that variable inside the template will be this form object. So a couple of things we have to do. We have to import render. Let's add from Django shortcuts import render. So that's added at the top. And then we need this sign up form. So what do we need from the user in order to sign up? Let's go into app, create a new file and call it forms.py. By the way, all of these files that we are ending up with, such as urls.py or forms.py, are like conventional Django file names. Whenever you define forms in Django, you usually put them into forms.py for your given app. So from here, we'll say from Django import forms, and then we'll say from Django contrib auth forms import user creation form, and from Django contrib auth models import user, and now we can define our sign up form, which is a user creation form. So what details do we want from the user? We're going to extend the user creation form, and we're going to say we'll ask for the email as well. So the user creation form asks for the username and password by default. We're going to extend it so that you know how to do that. We'll say forms.email field, and you can specify max length, for example, as we did earlier, required equal true, and you can specify help text required, enter a valid email address, for example. Then we also can use the class meta in here to specify what model this user creation form is related to. So we'll say model is user, and what fields we want to take from that user. So that's username, email, password 1, and password 2 for password confirmation. This is a little bit more complicated than it would be to just create the form manually, because it's dependent on this user creation form that is itself relatively complex and by default only asks for the username and so forth. So yeah, but this is what it's at the end of the day, what it's going to do is ask for the username, email, and password with a password confirmation field. So now we go back to views and we can import this from app.forms, import sign up form. And now we go back to what happens when the user submits the form. If the user has submitted the form when they make a post request, then we'll say form is sign up form with request.post. And that will contain the incoming form data that the user sent in the form that they just submitted when they submitted the HTML form. And now we can use this to check if it's valid. Form.is valid. And if it isn't, then this will raise an error and we'll be able to render, well, it won't raise an error, but we'll be able to render the template again with the form and the errors displayed. So we'll say user is form.save, and we'll simply log in the user automatically. You may not want to do this if you want to do something like email confirmation, where the user has to confirm their email before being able to log in, then you wouldn't want to log them in immediately. Logging in is a multi-part process. So there are things that you want to send back to the user when you log them in, and then the user will store that information in their browser and send it back to you each time that they make a request, and that's how you know that they are logged in. The process uses cookies and whatnot. We go into a lot more detail in the Django course, but I feel like it's maybe a bit too much to go into right now. Let's import login. We will need that. So we'll say from Django contrib auth import login. And then return, right? Redirect, which we also haven't imported, recipe list. And let's import that from Django shortcuts as well. So as you can see, the function-based view defines everything that is going on without the need for inheritance or like weird fields and so forth. So in some cases, it's simpler and easier to use a function-based view than it might be to use a class-based view. In this case, certainly it's quite straightforward. But, when you start adding logging and telemetry and sending emails and lots of other things, this can also get quite long. But there you have it. When the user submits the form, we create a form object with that incoming data. If it's valid, we save the user, log them in, and send them to the homepage. Otherwise, we simply render the form again with this form, which is invalid. And Django will automatically, because we use form as p, render the errors as well. So if there are any errors, it will be displayed. So let's create signup.html. I'm just going to create a new template here called signup.html. And we are going to, in its simplest way, copy this one here and paste it in here. Yeah, that'll do for the time being. We'll just change this to sign up. Just like that. I'm just checking my notes. My notes are substantially more complicated. We don't want to get into anything more complicated than this. We'll change this to sign up as well. All right, let's try this out. Let's start our application again. And we will now go to sign up. Oh, and I didn't register the URL. So there you go. That's the next thing that we have to do. Go to app URLs. And just as we have this login here, we need to define our sign up view. So we'll say, comma there, sign up. We will bring in our view, but now we don't have to do as view because that is already a function view. And we will do that. Joe Cook, thank you, Jose. I have to leave, but I've purchased the course. You're doing a great job. Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it, my man. Thanks for taking part in the early bird. I really appreciate it. It really means a lot that you're trusting me with that. I will make sure that the course is as best as can be, and I hope that you will really enjoy it. And also, I forgot to say, but if you have any feedback, suggestions, comments, issues with anything in the course or the website or anything else, please let me know. The course is still being made, so if there are issues or any problem, I would love to fix it before any more videos are recorded. So if you do go through any of the videos and you find any problems, please let me know. That would be really incredible. I don't think we've made any mistakes, but well, you always make some kind of mistake. That's unavoidable. Okay, we've got our sign up view. Let's go and sign up. There you have it. So you can see that we have a very cluttered sign up view. In the course, we do a lot more styling around it, and we create a custom form that isn't as, hits you in the face when you load this. Let's try to sign up. Test user, test at test.com, test password 123, test password 123. Password-based authentication, like, why would you put this in here by default? I don't know, but anyway, there you go. That all worked. So you can see that, yes, we had to do some work to get this here. We had to define our sign-up view, register the view, define the view, but all it does is it creates a form, checks it's valid, saves the user, renders the thing. All the actual, storing in the database is handled by the user creation form. So that's nice. And the login view that we didn't create, that already comes with the auth app, handles login in. And so at this point, it's probably a good time to also add the logout. You don't need a template for the logout because it simply redirects you. When you click the logout button, it redirects you away from the current page and goes back to the home page. And we should also go into base.html and re-add what I deleted earlier, which was various navigation items, which were here. So if the user is authenticated, then we show this form, and actually logging out is a form that uses a CSRF token in order to verify that this form is coming from the website and not from a third party. But you can style the button to look like a link. And then if the user is not authenticated, we show this login and sign up views in there. So that's what that looks like. We can log out and we simply get redirected back to this page. We can log back in, test user, test password 1, 2, 3, I think I said. Yeah, that's right. Brilliant. Now, with not that much time to go, I think that we are going to make some changes on the fly to what we're going to cover. And let me just think for a second about what to cover. We are going to cover... I think ratings. All right, guys, I'll let you decide whether to cover ratings. Paul, no worries at all. Thank you very much for tuning in for this time. Really appreciate it, and good questions as well. Thank you. Ratings or the rest of the CRUD stuff, like deleting recipes, updating recipes, etc. So I'll give you guys a second to decide. Well, I have some water. Let's make a poll. I'll make a poll. Ratings or CRUD? I've made a poll on the YouTube, so I think you guys can vote for it. I'll give you a minute. Let's look at Twitter chat. Nothing there. Okay, CRUD. Ratings, CRUD. CRUD's winning so far. I think the poll is on the chat. I think the poll appears on the chat. I think it's pretty safe to say CRUD is winning. So let's do CRUD. Let's do the rest. I think CRUD is probably the most important thing, right? To know how to do the various different things. So we've got recipe create view here. The first thing that we'll want to do when having a CRUD like this one, where we can create things, we need the user to be logged in order to create a recipe, right? Otherwise, we're going to get that error that we got earlier where the user ID was not defined for the function, or the user ID was not defined for the form that we had just submitted. So to require login, fortunately, we have a very easy way of doing it, which is from Django contrib auth mixins, import login required mixing. And then we simply grab that and we inherit from it in the view. And that's it. This view is now what we call protected. So the user needs to log in before they can access this endpoint. It's similar to the decorated login underscore required in Flask. For you guys that have done that in Flask, you'll know how that works. Login required mixing does the same thing. The other thing, there's another mixin that we can also use, and we're going to use it when we come to update recipes. So let's create our recipe update view, which again requires login and is a update view that we need to import. We'll say from here, update view. I'm going to actually terminate that and close the terminal. There you go. Now the update view works in almost identically the same way to create view. So we'll say model is recipe. Template name is app /recipe form.html. So it's actually the same template because the fields that we want the user to change are the same. Fields, title, ingredients, and instructions. And the success URL, which is the same one. Okay, so as it stands, just like that, we are ready to update recipes. But there's a couple of issues. The first is that we need to let me think. I'm just checking my notes. There's something I forgot. About the create view. And that is, let me show you what I forgot in the create view. What car is the Django course available on Udemy? I mentioned this at the start of the workshop. The Django course will be available on Udemy in its basic form. So the basic course will be available on Udemy in a couple of months' time when the course is finished. The complete course will not be available on Udemy. Yeah. So what I forgot in here is that the recipe has this author field, but the foreign key doesn't produce a field in the form, and it's also not automatically populated by any of these parts. So we need to actually set that the author of the recipe is the currently logged in user. That's something that we have to do manually. And to do that, we say form valid. We define this method that overrides a method in the create view. Base create view, process form view, I think. View, form valid. It's not in any of these, actually. I'm actually not sure where this is coming from. But anyway, this method we override, and it checks whether the form that was submitted is valid or not. And we don't want to check for validity. All that we want to say is form.instance.author to modify the object, the recipe object that this form is creating is self.request.user. So that gets the user model that's associated with the current request, and it sets it inside the form object. And then we simply say return super.formValid of form, and it calls the superclass's formValid method. So all we're doing is we're modifying the instance to include that author before continuing as was before. We're not inserting any new error messages or anything like that. We're just modifying the form data there. And that is now going to associate the currently logged in user with the author of the recipe. And down here in recipe update view, we have to do the same thing. And there is one more thing that we want to do, which is we want to make sure when we are updating a view that the author of the recipe matches the currently logged in user. You may be thinking, well, didn't we do that here? In a way, yes. But what this does is it sets the instance to be the currently logged in user. But it doesn't check whether the recipe was initially created by the currently logged in user or not. What we want to avoid is that a user can edit a different user's recipe. In order to do that, we bring in another mixin, which is user passes test mixin. And that also does come from that. Let me close that. And we inherit from it in here. This allows us to create test func, which basically we can do whatever we want in here. And if this returns true, then we say, okay, the user passes this test. The form may continue its processing. If this returns false, then we stop the processing and we don't save anything to the database. So what we want to say is recipe is self.getObject to get the actual recipe object that we've got associated, the recipe model object that we've got associated with this form submission. And we'll say return self.request.user equal recipe author. And this runs before this. And that's it. So let's have a try at it. See if these work. Let's run our server. Come in here, we'll type a new recipe. I will say test recipe 1, 2. And of course, we haven't registered our views. I always forget about that. There we've got our test recipe there. Let's register the update view in urls.py. We need to say, for example, here, path of recipe / and now we need to define what recipe we're going to modify. So we say int pk for primary key / update. And this kind of dynamic path just means that we can put an integer in here. That's what the int : means. We'll replace, the user will put an integer in this segment, and Django will pass this pk as an argument to the view, which it needs in order to know which view we are updating. And then we'll say recipe update view as view. Name is recipe update. Just like that. Yeah, okay, let's try that. So we've got our 2 recipes. We'll say recipe /2 /update. Is that the one that I selected? Yes, it is. Maybe I made a mistake somewhere. Hey, Andreas. Oh, hi. You've come at the perfect timing to help me debug this thing. I think I must have made a mistake somewhere. Let's see. Let's double check. Recipe int pk updates. Recipe update view. That is fine. And let me double check the views. Maybe I made a mistake here. By the way, hey, Peter, welcome. If you guys see the problem, let me know. I see the problem. See, I've corrected so many of these in my courses that the mind just jumps to it. So yeah, this comma here, this comma here is why we have this. Okay, yeah. This comma here is why we have this in the Teclado website. So it's a bit easier to see when there's no comma missing at the end. Okay, anyway, yeah, the comma there should not be there. Otherwise, instead of a string, that becomes a tuple. And that's no bueno. So, recipe to update. There you go. That's it updated. The updating works. And actually, let's see what happens if we try to go to recipe 1 update, because we didn't create that one. 403, forbidden. Wow, that's beautiful. Beautiful page right there. So obviously this needs a bit of styling. We're not going to do that in this workshop, styling that, but you can see that it works. You know, the user passes test mixin worked correctly. Now that I'm looking at this code, I'm actually not sure if we need this. Yeah, feel free to try that out and see if you can get rid of that. But let's not worry about it just now. Finally, deleting recipes. Deleting recipes is actually almost identical to updating recipe, but instead of a form, because to delete a recipe, we don't need the form with the fields and so forth, what we need is a way for the user to say, yes, I'm sure I want to delete this. So I'm going to copy recipe update view, but we're going to call it recipe delete view. And instead of update view, it's going to come in from a delete view that we're going to import at the top. Now, we don't need recipe form, but we do need confirm delete. And we don't need fields because there are no fields that we need to show the user. All that we're going to show is a form that says, do you want to delete this for sure? Yes or no. And we don't need this form valid. We only need test func because we want to make sure that the person that's deleting a recipe is the person that created it and no one else. So let's create this template. So we go to app/recipe confirm delete.html. And in here, we bring in this. So I'm just pasting it in because we only have about 10 minutes to go. But what this does is, again, defines the form. Well, there's a title, delete recipe, a div, are you sure you want to delete this recipe in a paragraph? And notice object.title. Object is the default name in Django views for the model that you are talking about. You can change that. You can say recipe.title with just one small change in the view. Then there's a form, which again has a CSRF token to make sure that a malicious actor wouldn't be able to submit this form for you from a different website. And then you've got your button to confirm delete or a link there to cancel that takes you back to recipe details. So let's go to urls.py and we are going to add our last couple of URLs, which are these. We've got recipe int primary key slash, oh, sorry, not this one, delete. And that takes you to the delete view. Let me change these for double quotes. I feel like we need to stick to the styling that we've got here. And here in recipe confirm delete, we are talking about recipe detail. Recipe detail is another URL that we can create to show information about a recipe. So if we go to views, we can define a detail view, which lets you see an individual item. And the detail view is, again, a generic view that we're going to create here under list view. We say class recipe detail view, which is detail view. Because you might want to see the list of recipes, so you can see them all or see all their titles, but you might also want to be able to drill into one and see the ingredients and instructions without having to edit the recipe. So here we say model for which model you are talking about. And this one's going to receive the primary key as well of the actual database row that you want to extract. And you can say template name is app/recipe detail.html. And that's it. That's your detail view. So we can create recipe detail.html. And there's one thing that we'll talk about now, which is that object variable that I mentioned earlier, recipe detail. We are going to say all of this end block content. It's going to simply show an H1 with the recipe title, the author's username, and then the ingredients and the instructions. So you can see these are inside some containers and you've got the heading and the content in there. Something else that we could do is we could say, hey, if the user is authenticated and the user is not, and the user is the recipe author, then we can add some links here for updating or deleting the recipe. So I'll bring them in here. These are a bit more complex and they've got, well, they're not complex, they just got a lot of styling. here we're simply creating two links, one that takes us to the recipe update and passes in the primary key of this recipe that we're dealing with, and another one that takes you to recipe delete and passes the primary key. But actually, none of this is going to work because Django wants this to be object.title, as we saw in the confirm delete here, object.title. But we can change that. So if we go to views.py again, we can say, well, that context object name that we've already seen, and call it recipe in this case. So instead of object, we use recipe. And we could do the same in the recipe delete view if you want. So down here, context object name, and then we go to confirm delete, and we simply change this to recipe.title, and down here, recipe.pk. All right, let's try it out. So we've got our user accounts and everything working. We can go to, oh, actually I forgot. I keep forgetting to register the URL. So let's register the recipe detail URL as well. So here we'll say path, recipe int pk, just like that. And it'll be views recipe detail view as view, and the name is recipe detail. So that's the last view that we've got here. So now we've got list, create, view, update, and delete. So that's the entirety of the CRUD. Okay, let's go in here and we'll say recipe/2. Oh, that went into update. We don't want to go into update. And there you go. This is the kind of styling that I had in the original application. You can see test recipe 2 by test user, ingredients 1, instructions 2, and then you've got your links here because we are the user that created this recipe. If we log out and then we go to recipe 2, then we don't get the buttons down there. Something else that you might want to do is, of course, in your recipe list, instead of simply displaying the recipe titles, you'll want to display links to each recipe so you can view them. Fortunately, that is fairly straightforward. I'll bring the code in here. You can see that this brings an h1 with the recipes and then a div. This uses grid, which allows us to lay things out as a table. And then for each recipe, we simply define a div with the recipe title, a paragraph with the author, and then a link to go to recipe detail with the primary key, or no recipes found if there are none. This is a for empty, which is kind of cool that Django has. So that is what this would look like. So as usual for one of my workshops, we run out of time, and things ended up going a bit faster than I intended. I always say I need to slow it down, but I think I need like 5 hours to go through all of this, which it might as well, because the Django course is quite long, and in it we cover, well, all of this and a lot more. I mean, if you guys haven't taken one of my other courses, you won't know that many of my courses come with a full Python refresher. So if you're maybe coming from a different programming language, you can learn Python in any of my courses with like 40 videos or something that teach you Python in depth. So that's something that you get access to if you buy the course. Then there's obviously the entire Django project setup and how to create a simple app. And then you've got the full actual app. We have some various presentations on what are cookies, what are CSRF attacks, what kind of security you need to worry about in your Django apps. All of that's there. Django filters and lots of other stuff. So if you want to support me, the channel, Teclado, and learn Django at the same time, and you trust us with the early bird purchase, then please consider buying the course or taking out a yearly subscription. In the links below in the YouTube description, there are 2 links. One to this course page where you can buy the basic or the complete course. And there's also a link to the subscription page with the Django coupon. So if you land in here and you want to subscribe, make sure to add your Django coupon here for $30 off your first year. But if subscriptions are not for you, because I know they are not for many people, then you can just buy the course. The complete course has more content in it. The basic course will be on Udemy later this year. But yeah, both are long. This one just has a bit more content to it. So any questions or comments before we call it a day? If you guys have any questions about the course, what may be covered, or the app that we've built into this workshop, or anything else, please ask away. If not, I'll call it a day in a couple minutes. And I'm also going to end this poll there. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. I know that 2 hours is a long time to be watching a workshop, but I feel like we've made a lot of progress, to be honest. We have built an entire Django app, a full stack Django app with user authentication, database migrations. We've set it all up, CRUD views, and a lot more. Tim Rupp, thanks. I enjoyed my intro to Django from the high desert of Nevada. Thank you very much for tuning in, Tim. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the kind words. I'm glad you enjoyed the workshop. It's really nice to do this live. You know, sometimes as a content creator, we're like working on our own for the most part. Well, my wife works with me in a lot of this content, but it's nice to, you know, have a chat with people, have a chat with you guys, and get questions and all that. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. All right, if there is nothing else, then I'm going to call it a day. But thank you so much for joining. If there are any more questions, or you're wondering about anything, or you want to just talk about Django or anything else, the Discord server is the best place for that. You can go to go.tekla.do/Discord to join the Discord server, and you know, I'm there. But other than that, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Consider taking the course or waiting for the Udemy launch, which will be later this year. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you for the support. And I will see you next time. I'm thinking about doing another live stream on development with AI tools, cursor and stuff for different Python frameworks. So if you're interested in that, also let me know. All right. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.